Cadence. Such a buzzword, right? I want to offer a big picture view, overview about what cadence is, how it can help to benefit you, and then some of the common misconceptions that are out there. And I wanted to show some relevant research of what kind of started it all, and then give you some actionable items. If you're new here, my name is Dr. Matt Meinerd. I'm a physical therapist that's super passionate about helping you run smarter, safer, and faster. So today's all about clarifying cadence, speed, and technique. Here it is. Here's the big overall big picture view. Low cadence and longer strides are not bad. That's been vilified. It's got a bad rep, and I'll explain how that came about and offer some more clarity. Research has long supported that increasing step rate, the number of steps that you take per minute, the frequency of steps, can help to reduce loading and braking forces to the legs, most particularly the knee. The stress, the amount of stress that the knee takes and how fast it takes it can be dictated by manipulating step rate. And we'll get into that. However, I've come to learn, I've been using step rate as a tool for about 12 years. It used to be my only defense or my only strategy for improving someone's mechanics back when I first started. But I'm going to show you we don't necessarily have to do that, because with an increase in step rate at a same speed, if we're having to take more steps to get to our destination, it can be more overall work, overall energy, right? So I'm going to go over the benefits that can come from increasing your step rate or your cadence. Those same benefits can occur without having to increase the frequency of your steps, more work overall. So what's the agenda? What are we going to be getting into? So you're going to hear me say some of these words interchangeably. Cadence, aka step rate, or also steps per minute, or SPM. So I'll try to be consistent, but just know those are all the same thing. And we'll get into that. First, we're going to get into what is cadence exactly. I'm going to go over the article that kind of changed the lives of thousands of practitioners and been cited over 700 times. And that has also influenced arguably millions of patients or people around the world. Super good article, but we're going to dig a little bit deeper on increasing cadence and step rate and how it lowers the impact. Then we're going to go based off of that study where I believe a lot of the confusion about cadence and around cadence of how that trickled down. Going to clarify some of that. And then we'll get into the actionable. How can you lower your impact, improve your running efficiency to help with either performance, running faster, or less force, less stress, injury risk, without increasing the cadence or step rate. We'll end with an actionable takeaway. If, then, do. Zoom out perspective. Where is this information going to get filed into your brain? What are we really talking about or working on? We're going to be talking about the technique bucket, the way that you move, the strategy of movement, and VO2 max, the amount of oxygen that our body requires per activity. So we're going to go over the way you move and oxygen demand when it comes to this step rate and technique. First bullet point, what is cadence, aka step rate? If we peel it down to the bare essentials, the most basic definition, cadence is a measurement of frequency. Particularly when it comes to running, it's a measurement of how frequently we're taking steps. And it's typically over a unit or period of time. So usually over 1 minute, we'll say a cadence, how many times each foot touches the ground. That will give us a number of frequency. Typically we count each individual foot, right, left, right would be 3. And that's where a lot of times you probably heard 180 steps per minute is what's considered normal or the goal. And we'll get into that. But this could be frequency of really anything. How often are you going to the bathroom? Frequency per hour. Could be per day. Frequency is just a measurement of occurrence. We'll talk later though about how fluctuating this can have secondary impact or benefits. We can't talk about step rate or cadence without also talking about step length. Step length is the distance traveled between each step. If we look at you run on the beach and we look at your footprints, step length is just the amount of distance covered. Another just measurement. We'll also get into later how just from this, we can't tell if something is good or bad. It's just distance traveled. That'll be super important later. And the relationship between the two is historically, if we're increasing the step rate, the cycles, there tends to be an inverse relationship with the step length. If we're taking more steps, quicker steps, it tends to be sacrificed on the amount of distance traveled. I always like using this analogy, not just the analogy of how we should propel forward with the paddle in the water, pushing the water back, but from the standpoint of frequency. Imagine if we clocked in 1 minute, you started paddling, the number of times your paddle is in the water and propels and pushes back, each time that happens, we're gonna rack up a stroke. That's why a lot of times in rowing, it's called stroke rate. Running, step rate. And back to the step length, in this example, after you push back, and by the time the paddle goes back in the water, that amount of distance traveled would be stroke length. The research. This is, you could call it famous article. Dr. Brian Heiderscheit et al. And company back in 2011. They weren't the first to talk about how influencing step rate or manipulating step rate can have impact on the body and mechanics, but they did a really good study, which I'll go over, and we got some good implications from this. But this is kind of where the domino first started, cited over 700 times. I want to talk about what did come of this study before we get into some of the misinformation about it. In 2011, they wanted to see what are the actual effects of step rate manipulation, adjusting cadence, on joint mechanics during running. Joint, where two bones come together, ankle, knee, hip. So the purpose, in simple terms, is it beneficial for the legs to increase the frequency of steps at a constant speed? The most basic foundation, what they're going to be asking. So I'm not going to go through each of these variables one by one. You can pause here and read through these if you want. For those of you that do like the details, at the end of the video, I will have a video of me going through me running and then visually showing and explaining what happens at each of those and what that means. But for now, if you're interested in this, hit pause, you can read these. But we'll try to make this a little bit more simple. Let's group these together. If you follow me for a while, the most common things that I always talk about are braking, overstriding, and bounding, excessive vertical. So we can actually group these together, each of these individual variables. For the sake of clarity, we can break this down into two main categories. Is the person bounding or is the person braking? And we'll also talk briefly about the effort, the exertion that they feel subjectively when they're manipulating these different variables. So first, what is bounding? Very quickly, bounding is jumping. It's the blending of moving forward, going up and forward versus just moving horizontal. Let's get some visuals. Ideally, if I'm 6 feet tall, I should be able to run in a room that has a ceiling height of 6 feet tall by softening my knees, by leaning forward, by leaving the ground and moving purely horizontal, not up and forward and down like bounding. I would not bonk or hit my head. So conversely here, where bounding occurs is we see when we go to leave the ground, the flight phase, we see up, then the body going forward, and then the body going down. Here's what the center of mass trajectory looks like. Arcing up. Versus gliding, the learned skill to take the jump out, push the ground purely backwards, not down and backwards, being able to not bonk our head. What we see here is staying under that threshold, but most importantly, we see the directions of forward when the foot leaves the ground, when we're in the air, the body's traveling forward and then down. So when I say take the jump out, this is what I mean. We're taking out that part of the flight phase where the body continues to raise up. So if we look at the center of mass distribution here, it's forward and down. The down is absolutely necessary. That's the cushioning. That's the eccentric activation where the muscles are absorbing. We need that down part. But what we're trying to avoid when it comes to bounding is that up part once leaving the ground. Next, braking, formerly or commonly known as overstriding. What is it? No matter what, when we move forward, a body or an object in motion stays in motion until acted upon by an outside force. So if I'm going through the air, the moment that the foot makes contact with the ground, always when running or walking, it's in front of the body. The difference, the distance between the center of mass, where the average weight is distributed on the body, near your pelvis, near your belly button, and where you contact in the ground in front, that slows or brakes. You can also call this the kickstand effect. You can kind of picture that, right? If this was just a simple shape moving forward, and now that contact point to the ground in front, that's going to slow down. Every action equal and opposite. So we're seeing here, when it comes to braking, can we minimize? What's the least amount of braking that can occur? Because we can't escape it. If I'm jumping up and landing down, up, down, starting and finishing the same spot, then I can land directly underneath my center of mass. But when it comes to locomotion, traveling forward, it's impossible to land directly underneath you. So the goal is minimizing. We can't escape it, but minimize braking. Let's get another little visual on that braking from different views. Side view, top-down view. Braking always occurs in some degree. As we're moving forward, if you look at that green target, that's the center of mass, there's always this constant downwards pull towards the earth. We call that the log or line of gravity. What we're seeing is the point of contact with the ground and the distance between that and the center of mass, that's the braking. So what we'll see is in this early part of the running cycle, when we're after that flight phase, when we first make contact with the ground, until we get to that point where our center of mass is directly over our base of support or that stance foot, until that time, braking is going to be occurring. And so we'll get into later the aha of when it comes to shortening the stride, this is what we're going to be referring to, the loading phase. But this doesn't account for the back part. That's why I talk about not all contact time is created equal. So here's another simple shape view of until that point we're getting the braking. Here's an interesting kind of top-down perspective. When the foot is in front of the center of mass, until we get to that point where our body is stacked, there's going to be braking that occurs. So that's our goal, is to minimize this. Okay, the study. Let's go over this. Dr. Heiderscheit is a fantastic, phenomenal researcher. I had the opportunity to meet and take a course of his in Charlotte back in 2017, 2018. Fantastic. Someone I've looked up to over the years when it comes to emerging evidence and truly understanding this stuff. So what was this study? So this study, they took 45 healthy recreational runners. That's important. Sometimes they're taking studies where people are injured, what part, how long is the injury, what part of their body. They were looking at healthy recreational runners that were running at least 15 miles per week for about 3 months, at least 3 months. This is their hypothesis. This is what they were setting out to prove or disprove. Increasing cadence or step rate would reduce loading to the lower extremity joints. Every time you hit the ground is hitting you right back. And that force needs to be distributed and absorbed somewhere. We're seeing, does increasing the frequency of steps change this to improve loading or reduce the amount of load the body takes? The methods, how do they go about doing this? So they had everybody run on a treadmill indoors at a moderate pace. Not slow, not too fast, but what they considered a moderate pace. They didn't go into a tremendous amount of detail about how they actually found this, but the key is once they did find this, that speed remains consistent the entire time. And that's why treadmill is easier to research than over ground, because a lot of times people will fluctuate their speed and their step rate. We're seeing here, when speed is kept at a constant, then we fluctuate the variables of step rate, what happens? So with everybody, they found their moderate pace. Let's say an example was 6.5 miles per hour as far as a speed. And then they wanted to see at that point, if that's the baseline, how many steps did they get? So 170. Similar to how you might get your own heart rate measurement. You hold, you feel a pulse, you count for 15 seconds, and then you multiply that times 4. That's going to give you your rate, your heart rate over a minute. They did something similar with more of a visual inspection, and they only counted one side. But all that to be said is they got that speed locked in, and then what is their preferred? Without cueing them, what's their step rate at that speed? Now we play around with it. Now we fluctuate. They wanted to see if we increase that step rate by 5%, what changes with those variables mentioned before? More simply put, braking and bounding. When we increase by 10%, also what happens? So in this example of this person that was 6.5 miles per hour at 170, first 178 steps per minute, use a metronome, simple beep, beep, going at that rate, having them keep up with it. Then they don't start recording the data until they can match that step rate. What happens? And they also want to see, here's the example of 10%, 187 steps per minute. Also important side note, they did also look at reducing step rate, but for the sake of clarity and understanding, when I had that on here, it just kind of overwhelmed me with information. So we're pretty much just mainly looking at this 5 and 10%. And what were the results? They found that a 5% increase in your step rate, going from 170 to 178 at the constant speed, the knee was happy. Simply put, less force at a slower rate the body was taking it, particularly the knee. When increased to 10%, 170 to 187, pretty big jump. It was still helpful at the knee, even more so, but now is also beneficial at the hip joint of reducing the load to the joint. So what a relief. Hip, knee, they're happy. Let's dig a little bit deeper. Why did this change? Was it merely just that number of steps? Can we just look at the number of steps and automatically know how someone's mechanics are, how efficient they are? Or what did this actually cause? By increasing the step rate, what changes did we actually see? So it's instead of giving multiple cues of lean this way, hold your arm this way, swing here, push here, instead of all those, if we have the runner focus on just one variable, step rate, auditory cue, when they keep up with that, what are all the other things that change as a result? So this is my hypothesis. By telling the runner to get more steps at that constant speed, two things happen. One, and the research showed, there was less bounding, less vertical, and less braking. Why I believe the bounding improves is subconsciously the body is going to be staying closer to the ground. It knows the ground is where the magic happens. That's where the propulsion piece comes in. We can't rack up steps if we're really far away from the ground. So we tend to move more horizontal because of the step rate increase, which helps with the bounding. And then the braking, the slowing. The further that we land out in front of the body, the greater the braking. So if the body's trying to subconsciously get more steps, we're wasting time having the leg continue going forward instead of bringing the leg back closer to underneath you. We're going to see that landing sooner, increasing the step rate is what improves the braking. So if we just think about this as a big picture, increasing the steps had a positive impact on the mechanics. However, increasing the number of steps that it takes to get there, point A to point B, at that constant speed, it's going to cause some more overall work, right? And the authors acknowledged that. They said this could be a trade-off. Each step does lower your stress. Each individual step you're taking is less impact. But if we're having to take more overall steps to get there, does it cancel each other out? It's a good area for future research. They have to take more step cycles to get there. The confusion. Two main points that I want to talk about that came of this that I believe are a misunderstanding, and try to get all on the same page. So they showed that shortening the loading response decreased knee loading. Yes, that loading response is the point where you first land, and until your center of mass of your body is directly over your foot, that's that loading response. What that doesn't talk about or dictate the entire back part, where your body is in front of your foot on the ground, or said another way, the foot is behind you. So a lot of times what this misinterpretation was is that longer strides are bad. We're just talking about the stride, the time in that loading response, not the entirety of it. So what did people do? They took small steps, like really small steps, because they were shortening both the loading response and the propulsion piece. Think of the canoe. If I'm barely pushing the water back at all and I'm taking it out trying to just get the number of frequency of cycles, I'm missing out on a lot of that power. So that's the drawback. Decreasing the distance traveled between each step. Because people were shortening their strides, the amount of distance traveled between each step was less. So they had to take more overall steps to get there. So a stride is just 2 steps. We can't look at this measurement of the distance traveled between each foot. We can't say, is this good or bad? It's dependent on speed. But when we say shorten the stride, what that's doing is taking a lot smaller steps, a lot less distance. So we're gonna have to take more overall. And this is exactly why I don't like the term overstriding, because I think it's a bit of a misnomer. Instead, braking versus overstriding, same thing. Here's another visual of not all contact time is created equal. Think of it like this. The red, when my foot is there, that's the braking phase. But the moment that my body is over the foot, and then that pass point, the propulsion piece, this is the green. This is the good zone. So yes, we want to shorten here, but we don't also want to compromise and shorten the back. And that's what a lot of times has happened because of the misconception of longer strides are bad. They're not bad. They're just neither here nor there. They're just solely dependent on speed. It's that loading response that we're concerned with. So how can we clarify this? So yes, shortening the loading response decreases knee loading. If then longer, not steps, a longer loading response, foot in front, is bad. That can make it a more correct or accurate statement. Then what do we want to do? Land closer to your center of mass. How do we do that? One could be increasing the step rate or maximizing the lean to shift your center of mass forward, which then approximates where you land and your center of mass. Making sure that we're leaning the entire body forward to approximate the two. The second part about confusion is that low cadence, demonized. Oh, low step rate? They don't know. They don't know. Let's clarify. The results showed increasing cadence or step rate, lowered knee loading. The misinterpretation that came out of this is that then low cadence must be inherently bad. If increasing it is good, lower cadence is bad. So a lot of people then targeted for 180 steps per minute. But the drawback, this can be extremely inefficient, which we'll go over, wasting a lot of energy. So I've seen this time and time again. People are using cadence, just that number, as a performance metrics. It's not a performance metrics. If you're going based off of that, you will set yourself up for disappointment. This same person that ran 1 mile at a pace of a 9:30 minutes per mile, if they have a cadence of 168, which we'll show in a second, very normal, they might think this was bad. They might think, I'm not at 180. They want to keep that same pace, but take a lot more steps. And that feeds that cycle of taking really, really short steps and can be inefficient. So here's the way I like to think about this. Think about the car analogy. You've got 3 different gears in this theoretical car. We have 3 different speeds that we drive in. We drive in the neighborhood, we drive in the city a little bit faster, and we drive on the highway. An example of those speeds or paces when it comes to over a certain distance, 6 miles per hour or a 10-minute per mile is like driving in the neighborhood. A little bit faster, 8 miles per hour or a 7:30 city, and then 10 miles per hour or a 6-minute per mile pace on the highway. If you were to notice, if you're driving your car or back in the day with actual manual transmissions or stick shifts, what do you notice about the RPMs, the frequency of rotations per minute? Another measurement. What would you think if we had a high RPM at a slower speed? What would you think? We're wasting energy. It doesn't need to be that high. Same when it comes to running. At these different paces and speeds, there's an incremental increase in the revolutions. So a lot of times what happens is people will try to have this really high step rate, where we're looking at the professionals that are running at a pace or a speed way even higher than the highway, and they say, oh, they have 185, 190 steps per minute. And then they try to apply that to where most of us are running closer to that 6 miles per hour or 10-minute per mile time. And that's where a lot of the confusion comes in. So think about it in the gears. Just like driving, when the RPMs get high enough as we go faster, the gears shift, the rotations or the RPMs go down. Same with when we're running. When we fluctuate speeds with running, the 3 Fs, we push the ground with more force, same with like shifting gears. We push the ground further back, and the last F is the frequency. We increase the frequency of all that. So think about that next time you're driving your car. Pay attention to the RPMs. So another kind of breakdown of that confusion, part 2, the clarification. If we look at 3 different speeds of moving forward, yes, walking and running, jogging, sprinting, all forward, the mechanics should be the same. That's a topic for another day that I've done that gets a lot of people fired up. But if we look at the speed and the associated step rate, if someone's walking, on average, the number of times they make contact with the ground is between 90 and 120 steps per minute. Said another way, hertz, 1.5 to 2 hertz. If we're going at an 8-minute pace per mile, or 458 minutes per kilometer, the step rate typically associated with that range can be anywhere from 150 to 180 if we're quote unquote jogging. This can be between 2.5 and 3 hertz. If someone is running in their gear 3, the highway, and that example is a 5-minute per mile pace or 308 minute per kilometer, they may have very well above 180 or 3 hertz. 1 hertz, 60 times 3, 180, that gives us that number, that 3 hertz or 180. So again, if we're looking at and trying to match people's step rate that are here, but we're running closer to here on the continuum, we can be wasting a lot of energy. Let's clarify point number 2. Low cadence is not bad. Increasing cadence can improve technique, but low cadence isn't necessarily bad. It's just that measurement, just like step length. Then what do? What's our target? Not 180, but our goal should just be to reduce braking and reduce bounding. Reduce the slowing, reduce the vertical. And we'll get into how we can do that. So there's a lot of different strategies. The step rate, if you've never done it before, play around with it. You can learn a lot. But what I found for most people, they'll see some benefits in their mechanics, but they're so winded, they don't keep up with it. We could use visual cues. We use auditory cues. There's so many different ways, but the one that I want to share with you is the one I've been using for several years now. We're actually researching this at the University of Dayton, where I went to physical therapy school, the tennis ball necklace. How can we get some kind of feedback? Feedback helps us learn. If I'm learning how to squat for the first time, if I never see a video or I never look in the mirror, how do I actually know if I'm doing it right? Getting feedback could be auditory. A coach or someone saying yes or no. It could be visual, either in real time looking at a mirror or video after the fact. Feedback is king. It's how we learn, it's how we automate. So this is how we can get both birds with one stone. Taking a tennis ball, 2 vertical slits, filling it with pennies or metal washers so it has some weight to it and makes some noise, taking a shoelace, going through it and making a necklace, measuring it to near your center of mass, near your belly button, and we give you this one cue. I want you to move forward in such a way that keeps the ball as quiet and still as possible. 2 feedbacks. Quiet, the sound it's making, and still, is it hitting you in the stomach? This is an external representation of our center of mass. So how can we use that feedback to see improvements? So if someone's bounding, going excessively vertical, because they're pushing down and back, as opposed to just back, the body goes up, the ball goes up, the body comes down, the ball comes down. It's going to make a greater noise. A lot of times it will actually hit you in the stomach. So by trying to subconsciously, and this has been really cool to see it, just like step rate was one variable, giving this feedback of keep the ball as quiet and as still as possible, see how the body changes. How does the body conform? People learn a lot in real time, and then we can take away the feedback to master it. Run the same with the ball on versus off. The other thing that can pick up on and improve is the braking as well. Because if we land, and as we land we're slowing, and if we're slowing ourselves a good amount, the ball is not going to be slowing, the ball is going to be continuing to move forward, and then it's going to come back and hit you, which can cause that feeling, not as still, bonking you in the stomach, and loud. So just this one cue could have multiple benefits. Run in such a way that keeps the ball as quiet and as still as possible. And again, then once we have it on, we don't want to become reliant on it, just like the person that can only squat if someone's telling them they're doing it right, or if they're looking in a mirror. We need to eventually learn to not have that feedback. So once we master the mechanics that the ball is quiet as possible, we see, can we emulate those skills? Can we emulate that movement pattern, whether the ball's on or off? And it's amazing a lot of things that you'll learn just from this. Actionable takeaway. If, then do. If you are winded by increasing your step rate, if you're using it as a strategy to improve your mechanics, practice leaning and propelling forward. You can do that with that tennis ball necklace. Do shift hips forward and push the ground back. That shifting forward, like I talked about earlier, takes your center of mass, moves it forward, which therefore, when we land, it also is going to approximate closer together, less braking. And then learning to push the ground purely back, not pushing the ground down and back, and the result of going up and forward. So we can work on those skills of reducing bounding, reducing braking, without manipulating or changing the step rate at all. If you're looking for some more guidance, I have an interactive course, the tennis ball necklace course. Learn to optimize your efficiency, enhance your speed with the tennis ball necklace. It's a process. There's 3 skills. Arm swing, sinking the arms forward and back. What should the ball do? What should it not do? Getting that feedback. Step 2 is the forward lean. If we're leaning appropriately, what do we see happen with the ball? What shouldn't happen to make it seem like I'm there with you to get you that feedback? And then finally, that gliding horizontal using the ball. So we're using vision, touch, and hearing. Then I also have a structure, a systematic way of teaching you or uploading that information, where we give you a lot of feedback at first, and then slowly we take it away with those 3 skills. 3 options. You can buy the online course and the tennis ball necklace. You can buy the course only and make your own tennis ball necklace, or you can buy just the tennis ball necklace only. If you go to L2R, Learn to Run, TBN, tennisballnecklace.com, I have a free course of showing you how to make a tennis ball necklace, and then some information how you can use that as well. So if you're still here, that means you may be interested in this part. If so, stick around. If not, I hope that this video was helpful. Please put any questions, comments, concerns, aha moments down below to see if I was able to successfully clarify some of this misinformation, which I hope. So I want to go through these one by one. So again, before we chunk these or categorize these into bounding, braking, and effort. But let's actually get a visual on it. First one, step length. Again, harder on the treadmill to see, but just the distance traveled between each step. Next, we want to see stance duration. What is the amount of time that the foot's on the ground? Then during this first part of that loading response, what's the distance between center of mass and the foot? The amount of vertical excursion that has to do with the bounding. The foot angle inclination, how far away is the foot in front of us? That braking impulse, that slowing, they measure this with force plates and use cameras. And then peak vertical ground reaction force, actually measuring how much stress. And they want to see what's the level of exertion, how tired are you, how did that feel? So that was a visual of all these individual variables that I'm looking for. Again, I hope that was helpful. Please let me know. Any other topics, questions, comments, concerns, let me know. But I'll see you next time.